This is a true story about a UFO sighting from someone I absolutely trust. They're a responsible person, and it seemed like it could be true. Welcome to Truly Terrified, Paranormal versus Physics, where we talk about some really weird stuff, and Joe the scientist explains how it's not possible, or maybe it is. I'm Lynn, and...
I'm Joe.
Alrighty. Back a long time ago, we'll go in the Wayback Machine to... It might have been the late 1980s, might have been the early 1900s, 1990s. I'm not really sure.
Clearly.
I had a neighbor. We're just going to call him Mr. Edwards. Mr. Edwards was a very upstanding person. He was the president of a bank. He became the superintendent of a large school district. He was the bishop at his church. He was a well-respected, very sober individual.
Was he Mormon?
Yes, he was Mormon. That's why he was the bishop of his church. I think they served for 2 years or something, and then they go on and...
I don't know. I vaguely remember someone with that name, and I think they were Mormons, so...
Yeah. Okay, so Mr. Edwards, who has now passed away, he told me that when his boys were young, he was a Boy Scout leader, because I think he had 5 boys. And so he was a Boy Scout leader, or whatever you call them in the Boy Scouts, and he took the Boy Scouts, his troop, out to Grand Canyon to camp. Back then they did stuff like that. I don't think they do that anymore. I think they only go to, like, official campgrounds. So they all went out there.
You mean like go out in the wild? Like
Yeah.
more wild
Yeah, I
areas?
don't think they just go out and, like, you just say, I'm going to take these kids out and give them knives and matches. And
That's funny if they don't do that, because that's the whole point, isn't it?
well,
To be
I think there's
self-sufficient?
skills I'm sure it is, but I think there's skills you're supposed to learn according to the Boy Scout handbook. They don't call it Boy Scouts anymore. They call it Scouts. And probably for safety and control reasons, they just do it at official places, at least in Wisconsin, because Sage and Summer and Spencer are all members of the Scouts, and they just go to official Scout camps. So Mr. Edwards took his Scout troop out to Grand Canyon, and they were camping. And I'm not really clear whether they were in a campground or they were in some wild part of the park, because I wasn't really familiar with Grand Canyon at that point in my life. I've since been there, and I've, hiked around, and I've seen what's there. So it's possible they were in a campground. It's possible they were not. But if you think about the Grand Canyon, it's pretty, even in the places where there's a lot of people, feels pretty isolated. There's not light staining in the sky. What do they call that?
Light pollution.
Light pollution. There's not light pollution. There's, it's pretty
Isolated. Out there.
Yeah. So they're out there, and it's the middle of the night, and
Wait, are they in it, or are they on the rim, or?
I don't know, because I didn't know enough about it
To remember.
to know what the places were to put it in my memory.
I have to imagine they were not in it.
They may have been in it. Now, he told me this story, and because I expressed a lot of interest in the story, he then gave me a notebook that had his first-person account of what had happened and the locations and everything. But because, like I said, I wasn't really familiar with the Grand Canyon at that point, I didn't lodge them in my memory, like, spatially, so where everything was. So if he said we were down at whatchamacallit Spring, I wouldn't have known whether that was on the rim or down in the canyon. I don't know. So they're all camping, middle of the night, and he sees a group of UFOs come over. And the way...
So he sees like lights.
Yeah. And the way he described it was that they were moving slowly, they were hovering, they were making erratic
Like low?
movements. It was low. It was very, very clear that this was not anything he'd ever seen before. Again, let me remind you, this guy had been a bank president of a large regional bank. He'd been the superintendent of schools of a large school district. He was familiar with living near an Air Force base because he lived outside of Las Vegas, Nevada. He would have known if this was something that you would ordinarily see that was, natural.
And he wouldn't be
air
making
traffic.
it up.
He would not have made this up. So he said that this was shocking and kind of terrifying. And I can't really remember whether he packed up the kids then or they waited till the morning, but they left. He just thought this is not good, and he took the kids back to back to their home base. And then, because he was such an upstanding member of society, he wrote a letter, and I'm sure it was a well-written professional letter, to the United States government and said, I saw this thing, and I don't know what it was, but I thought you should know that I saw this. And he didn't hear anything back and didn't hear anything back. And then a while later, I don't know if it was a long time, maybe just within the time period that it would take a letter to get to someplace and be processed, but some period of time later, not years, recent enough that it was still fresh in his mind, there was a knock at his door, and he opened the door, and there was a group of men in, the suits and ties, looking very official, and they came in and said they were from the United States government. If he told me what branch, or if they told him, that is lost from my memory now, but they came in and they sat down and they told him, you must never speak of this again. You must never tell anyone about this again. Now, he'd already told people, it had already been like in the newspaper, that he was risking his very stellar professional, what do you call it?
His career.
Well, no, what do you call it? Your how people think of you.
Oh, I know what you mean, but they don't know what you mean. Right. Reputation.
He was risking his very stellar reputation on telling people about this, but he was so secure in the knowledge that what he'd seen was nothing he'd ever seen before, nothing anyone had ever told him about before. He was probably not the kind to have read science fiction books. He was so sober, such a plodding, serious man. And this was so out of character for him. And he risked it all to tell what he knew to be the truth. Mm-hmm. And when he told it to me, to say he was passionate implies a certain amount of excitement or something. Mm-hmm. He was passionate in that he was absolutely certain he was telling the truth. He was not excitable about it. He just said it like it was. This is what I saw. This is what happened. So
he doesn't want it to be any particular thing. He just observed something.
Yeah, and he felt like the government needed to know.
It's interesting because if it was like just a random phenomena, maybe it was like a car on the highway or something, then why would the government show up and care? And they don't just do that. You can't just prompt them to do that by sending them a letter. Mm-hmm. They know something about it. Right.
And then to come and tell him, you must never speak about this.
That really is just like not a good, on their part. Yeah. It's not a good idea because it's like, there's then something to that. If you just hear someone telling a story, it could be anything. But then that narrows it down to something more serious if that happens.
Now that I think about it, it probably occurred earlier than what I said because his children were adults at that time and Christina was she was probably 11 or 12. So was Roswell recent enough that...
I think it was the 50s, or maybe it was the 40s. I think it was
the 40s. So...
It still was, though, in that time period where people were like,
Right.
Because it was basically non-existent pre-World War II, and then there was Roswell, and then there was just probably a lot of it was the counterculture, 50s, 60s, 70s counterculture. Conspiracy theories became a thing. They weren't really, as far as I know, a thing before that, beyond maybe just like wartime conspiracies, which were obviously a thing. But so it would have been perfect time period.
Looking to see if I could find anything about anybody who said they saw UFOs over Grand Canyon. There is a book. I don't have the book, so I have not read the book about such things. And apparently it said that there were several stories about people seeing UFOs over Grand Canyon. But this one, let me see if I can. Okay. In 1953, on May 21st, 1953, about 8 miles northeast of Kingman, Arizona, there was something that occurred. Now, if you think about where Kingman is, it seems like it's a long ways from the Grand Canyon, but really the way that the canyon goes, it's actually not that far from the Grand Canyon.
Actually, yeah, you're right. It must not be because it's like Grand Canyon's like an hour away from Dolan Springs. Dolan Springs is only like an hour or two away from Kingman, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, you're talking about
by road.
The one section of the canyon that's on a Native American land.
Yeah.
And so I'm not talking about that one. I'm talking about the main Grand Canyon Park.
Like I see.
That's up by Williams, Arizona, I think it is. The Roswell incident happened in 1947, and this happened in 1953 in just northwest of Kingman, Arizona. Because I didn't write it down, I'm just scanning this article. It was about 8 miles northeast of the Kingman Airport, and the government sent about 40 scientists to study this. What happened is something crashed from the sky, and because it was near the airport, they probably had it on. I don't know if they had radar. Yeah, they had radar then.
I think
in the 50s.
They probably had radar.
But certainly they had people scanning the skies. So, it probably was viewed by people who were not just average people living in trailers out in the middle of the desert. And this is how they described the object.
Did they even have people living in trailers out in the desert then?
Yeah.
I mean, certainly chimes of...
And shacks.
Shacks, yeah.
Yeah, like Chloride, they had shacks out there.
But it's like poor people, not necessarily unsavory
and
people.
Miners.
And miners, yeah.
So the object was described as metallic, 30 feet wide and 3.5 feet high. It was oval-shaped and had portholes. Okay, let's just imagine something 30 feet wide. Oval-shaped.
Pretty big.
So
I think I've seen maybe a depiction of something like that. It has like windows all around its circumference.
Only 3 feet high. That's kind of weird.
Well, saucer,
And inside, dead, were 2 to 4 4-foot-tall humanoids. They had large eyes and they were wearing metallic suits.
It's funny because it's like, if it was like some sort of vehicle, like high altitude observation deck or something, I don't know, whatever the military was testing, and it crashed, the people were wearing suits to protect from solar radiation or something, and so it looks really weird,
But they wouldn't be 2 to 4 feet tall?
If a bystander reported that, they may have been comparing it to the size of other objects nearby. They obviously didn't just have a tape measure. So if they misestimated the size of the object, the vehicle, so then they misestimate the size of the occupants.
Okay, so one of the guys who went there was a scientist. He was an engineer named Arthur Stansel. And he said after making measurements and studying the crash site, they concluded that the craft had struck the ground at 1,200 miles per hour, but was not really damaged. And he said it definitely was not human-made.
One of the, presuming the object crashed at apparently 1,200 miles per hour.
You'd think there'd be a crater.
Well, so one of the ideas with UFO, alien spacecraft as UFOs is that they are apparently traveling really fast, but in their own local environment, they're not moving because they warp space-time or whatever. So, if it was some exotic technology and a vehicle like that, it appears to be moving fast, but then it hits something and it's not actually moving fast.
Right. So I don't know how Stansel concluded that it hit the ground at 1,200 miles per hour.
Yeah, and that's...
he doesn't really mention a crater.
So, and also, how would he know that exact number?
Right.
He talked to somebody who was measuring it? Probably not.
Don't know. He said it was not built by anything that he was aware of on Earth. It was more like a teardrop-shaped cigar, like a streamlined cigar. So the highest point was 3.5 feet tall.
I have to
30 feet
imagine
long.
that all of the different shapes of UAP that people report are like all the same shape, or roughly the same shape. It's just like they're seeing it from different angles, Mm-hmm. Like, for instance, a teardrop shape. Take
From one
a cigar
angle that's
that's long, rotate it, one end appears smaller, one end appears larger, teardrop shape. So again, it's like you could be pretty sure, as long as the person isn't making it up, that the event they're saying happened, but the specific details are probably not exactly right. Like qualitatively, they may be right. It had a weird shape. Okay. Like it had a long shape. That's probably right. It was moving fast. Probably not that fast, but it's like, okay, anywhere from 100 miles an hour to 1,000,000 miles per hour or something, you know? Like those, roughly, it's correct. Like within a few orders of magnitude, but it's still not, it's probably not. Like anything, even, let's say ghosts are real and, you know, people saw ghosts, they probably aren't getting it exactly right in their report, you know?
So I don't know how to pronounce this word. Metallurgist.
Sounds right.
Somebody who's a scientist who studies metals. Leonard Stringfield. He also was there, and he spent 2 days analyzing this craft and the materials that it was made from, and he concluded that it was not constructed on Earth. People who came to looky-loos, tried to come and see what was going on, said that there was, next to where the object was, there was a tent, and it was guarded by military police. And so that Leonard Stringfield said he managed to glance inside the tent at one point, and he saw the dead body of what he assumed was about 4 feet tall human-like creature wearing a silver metallic suit. The skin on its face was dark brown. Of course, it could have been burned, you know, who knows. So this was covered up for years. That guy that wrote the book Behind the Flying Saucers, Frank Scully, he found more witnesses, and that's some of this information has come from some of those witnesses. There were personnel that came, and they said the dead creatures, the dead humanoids, were packed in dry ice, and they were shipped to Area 51 in Nevada. They also said there was ancient Sanskrit-like type on things, so it was like, now they're just going by their own experience and their own knowledge. So Sanskrit-like type is almost a rune-like type, isn't it?
And well, it certainly looks exotic.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, sure, it's not like whatever script it was is exactly like that, but it may have just triggered, oh, this seems ancient or something, you know.
There was what appeared to be copper, and there were other things that they found fascinating. So if that happened at the same time Mr. Edwards saw his strange thing at the Grand Canyon, and I don't know, I don't know what the time frame was. I'm terrible with ages, partially because I have facial blindness. He was old when I knew him. Was he old enough to have been my grandfather? I don't really know. Christina was about 11 or 12 at that time, and he had a grandchild that was about 8, because I drew a picture for that kid. Maybe he was, I don't know. I don't really know. But I absolutely feel like his account of what he saw was accurate. It wasn't embellished. It was serious. He was a sober individual. And I don't think he would have made it up. And I think he would have known, had it been, you know, like a missile testing or something. We're not talking about now where they have crazy stuff going on that we can't even conceive of that could be in the sky, and you know, that you could look at it and say, wow, that must be something from outer space, when in reality it's just our government testing some new rocket ship or something. This was not in that era at all. And then to see this account of what happened not that far away from there, you know, and it's conceivable, if crafts were following the Grand Canyon for whatever reason, that's where they would have ended up, is outside of Kingman. You know, that's exactly where they would have ended up, or up in Utah, Colorado, or something like that.
There's this one idea that that UAP are alien spacecraft, and they're creating like maps of the train and whatnot. Well, it's just really a strange idea, because why would they be doing it now? That's so weird. I mean, like, they'd be here for thousands of years, almost assuredly. They would have already done it many times over. There's no reason why they would be in the Grand Canyon unless there was like something happening that, there's a point to being in the Grand Canyon.
There are some of those animal mutilation stories that come out of Arizona in the remote areas of the desert near the Grand Canyon. So, maybe they're picking up specimens to study. I don't know.
We should do something on animal mutilations, because my own feeling of animal mutilations is they're just dead animals that have been partially eaten by other predators. What?
I just have things to offer to that conversation.
Okay, well, we should do a thing.
Okay,
then.
we'll do that next week.
Yeah, it's strange because there's no particular reason why in a particular area you'd have two Grand Canyon stories, Area 51, in New Mexico, Roswell. Why the desert? There's more sightings proportionally around nuclear facilities that have some nuclear aspect, like nuclear warheads, nuclear reactors. But back then, I don't know. But
both of those areas, Roswell, New Mexico, and Grand Canyon, Arizona, they are not, Roswell, there's an Air Force base there. Grand Canyon, there's an Air Force base in Las Vegas, Nevada, which is by the crow flying. It's not that far away. And in Colorado, there are also huge bases. So I don't know. Is it something of our government? Is it something else? How could these people who are, they're scientists, engineers, and metallurgists, however you pronounce that. These are reasonable people. Why would they risk their reputation on going on the...
Keep in mind, there are a lot of people who, despite their reputation, say some crazy and stupid stuff. And also, especially in the age of science fiction, people can misinterpret things and be really sure of what they saw, And that's not to say it. I mean, it's like there are leaps you have to go across to get to aliens or anything beyond just like the government's testing stuff. People got it wrong. It was a natural phenomena. It was
right. Okay, so I'm going to add one more thing, and we will go into this subject at a later date. But the reason why it makes me think that there's something to this is because I had a friend when I was a young girl, and her father worked at Area 51. And she asked him when she got to be of the age where, as all young people do, early teens, you start thinking about UFOs and stuff, at least in my era you did. So she asked him, what's the thing with Area 51? And however he said it, whatever he said, indicated to her he couldn't tell her. It was crazier than she could ever even imagine. And they would never speak of it again.
Of course, that is also going through what she interpreted from asking that,
Well, that's
if
true.
If she's already primed for...
I don't know that she was or not. She's kind of a dry wit sort of person. And her father was also. And so I think, if anything, she would have probably said it very, very plainly, and he would have probably said it very plainly, and that would have been the end of the subject, and nothing more was ever said about it. Her brothers had different personalities, and perhaps they talked to him about it, although I don't think so, because I think their personalities were so different, they probably never talked to their dad about stuff like that, because he wasn't the kind to tell you something like that. I mean, I don't think I ever exchanged 3 words with the man. They lived down the street from us because he was so, I don't even know what the word is. I don't have words for it. He looked very buttoned up, very closed off. Very constrained. What was out at Area 51? Don't know. They say they took those aliens out to Area 51. Okay. Mr. Edwards saw something out in the desert, could have been the same time. I don't know. And he was visited by the government saying, don't talk about this. Wouldn't you think that if it was something the government had done, they would say, this is something the government is working on. We don't want you to talk about this. They wouldn't have to say what it was or anything else, but to just say, don't ever talk about this again. End of subject. That is suspicious to me. Okay, just a couple things I want to touch on real quick. A person named Kelly sent us a message. They said they'd listened to the podcast about the spook light, and they said they'd been out there on several occasions, and they don't really have a strong opinion on whether or not it's paranormal, and they feel like some of the sightings may have really an ordinary explanation, but they have seen something unusual out there.
Oh, wow.
They're going to go out there in March and do some more exploring. Investigating. And I have tried to insinuate us into their investigation. So we'll see if we get invited to go. That would be awesome.
I definitely think we should go and look into it again.
Yes, absolutely. The other thing I have to talk about is, let me get that up, because I think that was a public comment. Because we've said if somebody comments, we will talk about it. So I have to mention it.
We will talk about it.
We will. There's so many comments. I have to scroll through them all because there's so many comments on those.
The negative ones?
Yeah, just horrible. And I don't read them because they're horrible. They're insulting me and telling me I should die. Okay, and we did get one on false memories. This is from Scott Sands. I don't give two fucks what anybody says. The Monopoly guy had a motherfucking monocle. Oh. I hate when people like you say I'm remembering shit wrong. Kiss my country ass. That's hysterical. And then this one, which is not negative like the last one I just read. This one is from Rush Blackthorn. And he said, great podcast episode. Just wanted to let you know that the Church of Satan and the Satanic Temple are two different organizations. Both are atheistic organizations and have some similarities, but it's actually the Satanic Temple that tends to get involved in political action, and they do have a much higher membership. Still not a large organization, but it does have well over 1,000 members in the States. So that's interesting, and I
think that must have been the one I've heard of.
Yeah, now I'm educated, because I didn't realize there were two, and one was more popular than the other. So that's it.
More the merrier, I think.
Yes. But kiss my country ass. Our contact information is in the show notes. You can email us, text us, or even call and leave a 3-minute voicemail. And as always, if you have a story you want to tell, send it to us. Please share, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and never be so terrified you can't run.